Hi everyone, welcome to episode 7 of The Liberal Conservative. So much goes on in the news on a second by second basis. There's not enough time in the day to research all of the lies and all of the content that is constantly being bombarded at us at all times. Last week we spoke about Iran, and this week I want to dive a little deeper into a little bit of all of the subjects that we've covered so far. So this is going to be a little bit about the industrial military complex and the Middle East. Of course, we're going to talk about Iran, but we're also going to talk about every single U.S. president since Nixon and what their stance was on the Middle East. It's really all so convoluted, and it all works together. One overlaps the other, and it's a crazy triangle and knot of insanity. So episode 7 of The Liberal Conservative is called American Dynasty Politicians and Their Middle East Conquest: The Lies, the Destruction, and the Terror. Every president has painted the Middle East or someone in the Middle East as the enemy. But behind every war and every drone and every regime change was a lie wrapped in a flag and sold for profit. So the scan is the Middle East and why they chose the Middle East. And it was never really about democracy, and it was always very much about oil, dominance, and feeding the war economy. And the Middle East is the perfect villain for white America. It's brown, it's Muslim, it's misunderstood, it's easy to bomb, and it's easy to blame. So why did the Middle East become America's forever scapegoat? What they were really after, of course, continues to be resources, power, and permanent instability. The formula is to invent a terror threat, fund it, blame it, invade it, and profit. Let's start with Jimmy Carter. Maybe the quiet catalyst? Funded the Mujahideen before the USSR entered Afghanistan in Operation Cyclone. He backed the Shah in Iran while Iranians starved. Now, mind you, I do have to put a side note here that he backed the Shah, but it was under pressure from the CIA. The CIA is like really the worst KGB. We're thinking we have the best intelligence, but actually they're an underground terror group, basically, running the government behind the scenes secretly and lying to presidents to push them to take action that they want to take. Also, all and solely to fund the war machine. And later they admitted, by the way, the CIA admitted that they baited the Soviets into war. Ronald Reagan, the arms dealer in chief. He armed Saddam Hussein during the Iran-Iraq war. He secretly sold weapons to Iran in the Iran-Contra deal, trained and funded death squads under the guise of freedom fighters, and mainstreamed Islamophobia to justify U.S. expansion. Then we had George H.W. Bush Sr., Desert Storm and deeper lies, invaded Iraq under false pretenses, Kuwait incubator hoax, bombed civilian infrastructure, left Saddam in power to ensure long-term instability, and sparked the modern Gulf War economy. Bill Clinton, sanctions and silent deaths, continued harsh sanctions that killed 500,000 Iraqi children. Madeleine Albright, the price was worth it, is what she said. Bombed Sudan's pharmaceutical plant, crippling medicine supply, played diplomatic games while letting apartheid expand in Palestine. Bush Jr., the war criminal, or his cabinet was. 9/11 used as a blank check, invaded Afghanistan, never left, lied about Iraq, and weapons of mass destruction again, destroyed Iraq, destabilized the region, created ISIS, handed war contracts to Cheney's Halliburton and Blackwater, passed the Patriot Act, turning war tools inward. Barack Obama, the drone emperor. Hope and change became remote bombs in Yemen, Pakistan, and Somalia, backed Saudi Arabia's genocide in Yemen, took out Gaddafi, left Libya in chaos. By the way, insert Hillary Clinton in this and her role in the as a Secretary of State. Armed Syrian rebels who joined Al-Qaeda and ISIS factions and perfected quiet empire building through tech and silence. Donald Trump is the fascist dealmaker, gave Israel everything, Jerusalem, Golan Heights, billions in weapons, assassinated Soleimani, violated Iraqi sovereignty, sold arms to Saudi Arabia after they killed Jamal Khashoggi, banned Muslims, and normalized authoritarianism. And Joe Biden will forever be known as the genocide president, funded and justified Israel's 2023 to 2025 Gaza genocide, blocked ceasefires, vetoed UN resolutions, gave Netanyahu more weapons after confirmed war crimes, ignored his own voter base, proving empire is bipartisan. The blowback. How all of this just really came back home. Military gear is now used against protesters. Propaganda came home too. Legacy media, selling lies after lies after lies. Surveillance came home. Facial recognition, predictive policy, and terror came home. Created enemies now used to justify more funding. Is there a wake-up call? The American people see it now, maybe? We weren't the heroes in the desert. We were the invaders and the real terrorists. They wore suits in D.C. Veterans turned whistleblowers. TikTok and independent media breaking through propaganda. Gen Z not buying the "we're the good guys" script. The anti-war left and right aligning, finally. The exit plan is to reject the war machine. Stop voting for warmongers. Boycott war profiteers. Raytheon, Boeing, Lockheed Martin. Elect anti-war progressives. Build media that tells the truth. And reclaim policy with people-powered PACs. So, that was a brief overview, and I'm going to dig into each president and what happened. So, Jimmy Carter created the Camp David Accords in 1978, brokered peace between Egypt and Israel. This was historic and remains one of the only lasting Arab-Israeli peace deals. He advocated for human rights, publicly emphasized diplomacy, restraint, and human rights, especially in contrast to Nixon and Kissinger's realpolitik. Wasn't a war president. He didn't launch major invasions or bomb campaigns in the Middle East. Where he did contribute, though, often via his cabinet, like I said earlier, was that he supported the Shah of Iran. He continued U.S. backing of Iran's brutal monarch despite massive human rights abuses. This directly led to the 1979 Iranian Revolution and eventual hostage crisis. He greenlit the Mujahideen funding in 1979. His national security advisor started funding Islamic extremists in Afghanistan before the Soviets invaded. He later admitted that the U.S. knowingly increased the probability of Soviet intervention. And he militarized the Persian Gulf. In response to the Iranian Revolution and Soviet expansion, Carter laid out the Carter Doctrine of 1980, which basically said we will use military force to protect our oil interest in the Gulf. This became the philosophical basis for the Gulf War, Iraq War, and every U.S. military base in the region. Jimmy Carter tried to bring peace to the Middle East. He gave us the Camp David Accords and preached human rights, but his administration, through Cold War paranoia and oil interest, still played with fire. He funded extremists in Afghanistan and propped up a brutal regime in Iran. And while he didn't drop bombs, he helped write the doctrine that made them inevitable. we have to also remember that presidents are the fall guys. These people are picked on purpose, and everything that happens behind the scenes via their cabinets or their CIA or the FBI, they're basically forced into, like their hands are tied. A lot of times they get lied to. They count on these people for counterintelligence, for federal investigations, and they bring them bogus reports because they want the CIA and the FBI and all of these people that actually rule the world, they want to keep feeding the war machine. So a lot of times these presidents are brought bogus investigations that just lead them to the path that the CIA wants them to go down. It's not necessarily that the presidents are making all of the decisions. That's not necessarily true. We did see that with John F. Kennedy, and then what we saw happen is that he got assassinated, right? So just very important to keep that in mind at all times. Peace isn't profitable. That's why every president who tried was blocked, silenced, or killed. The shadow government of who actually runs America is really billionaires, spies who never leave office. And a lot of times we don't even know their names, and they don't answer to us. So the illusion of presidential power, presidents come and go, and the military-industrial complex will always stay. Elected officials are figureheads, and deep state, CIA, Pentagon, NSA, corporate lobbyists, they make the real calls. National security briefings are basically a propaganda script. When a president resists war, they get Kennedy'd. That's an actual phrase that the government uses to describe these situations. When a president plays ball, they get a second term, book deals, and a presidential library. The CIA is America's unchecked empire, literally, and they constantly feed the war machine. It was founded in 1947, and the original mission was, of course, to stop communism, but it evolved into a global black ops force with zero accountability. It's known for toppling foreign governments, think Iran 1953, Chile 1973, Congo, Guatemala, etc., arming both sides of conflicts oftentimes, lying to presidents, Congress, and the public, running fake media outlets, propaganda films, and false flag operations. They don't protect democracy. They protect American business interests at gunpoint. And of course, the same companies completely and always benefit from these endless wars. Lockheed Martin, Raytheon, Boeing, media conglomerates, think tanks, politicians. It's the same people that are constantly profiting. JFK and the CIA and the beginning of the end for him. John F. Kennedy said he wanted to splinter the CIA into 1,000 pieces after the disaster of the Bay of Pigs. He also wanted out of Vietnam. He opposed covert CIA coups. He feared a military takeover of foreign policy. He began withdrawing troops from Vietnam in 1963. The CIA panicked, had just been embarrassed in Cuba by the Bay of Pigs, hated Kennedy's distrust, under Allen Dulles, ran rogue operations. And Lyndon Johnson benefited directly. CIA operatives like E. Howard Hunt later implicated. JFK's death gave Lyndon B. Johnson the chance to escalate the Vietnam War. The Warren Commission was a cover-up, not an investigation. Lyndon B. Johnson escalated massively the Vietnam War. He lied to the public via the Gulf of Tonkin false flags, tied to major military contractors from Texas, sent 500,000 troops to a war we knew we could not win. Nixon secretly bombed Cambodia and Laos, 2 million deaths, extended Vietnam for years after knowing it was a failure, invented the war on drugs to suppress leftist and black resistance, and opened up the global oil dollar empire with Kissinger and the Saudis. Jimmy Carter, like I said, tried to be a good president but got played by his cabinet, peace deals, Camp David, overshadowed by funding of Mujahideen, Afghanistan, birth of al-Qaeda, supporting the Shah of Iran, Carter Doctrine, we will use force for oil. Like, there isn't a president that can just come in and clean everything up and actually drain the swamp, like Donald Trump said, and do really good things, because it's not profitable for all of these people that are just accustomed to centuries of making money on war. I mean, I think we have nothing better than, no better, the modern presidents like Reagan, George W. Bush, Bill and Hillary Clinton both and then Bush Jr. are perfect examples of people that just went in with one narrative and did horrific things behind the scenes. Iran-Contra was a disaster under Ronald Reagan. George W. Bush launched the Gulf War for absolutely no reason. He killed 500,000 Iraqi children with sanctions, right? We're going crazy over Netanyahu and his destruction of Gaza, but our presidents have done the same, if not more, harm to the world. And Bill and Hillary Clinton are like the neoliberal war couple. They've bombed Iraq routinely, enforced deadly sanctions, backed Israeli aggression, bombed Sudan's medicine factory. Hillary Clinton later destroyed Libya. She literally said, "We came, we saw, he died," laughing after Gaddafi's murder. And Bush Jr. is a legitimate war criminal. He stole 2000 election via the Supreme Court, right? He used 9/11 to invade Iraq and Afghanistan. Cheney made billions of dollars with Halliburton profits. The Patriot Act, domestic surveillance tape, and he killed over 1 million civilians. I guess we can call Obama a Peace Prize / war president. Droned 7 Muslim countries, supported the Saudi-led genocide in Yemen, took out Gaddafi, destabilized Africa, armed Syrian extremists, did nothing to stop Israeli apartheid, by the way. Do we have any anti-war truth-tellers? We do. Barbara Lee, only member of Congress to vote against the 2001 war authorization. Tulsi Gabbard, but the early years. Anti-interventionalist turned contrarian. Bernie Sanders, of course, amazing. AOC has spoken out against genocide and military funding. Ron Paul is an anti-war conservative, opposed the surveillance state. Edward Snowden exposed NSA spying. Chelsea Manning exposed war crimes. Julian Assange imprisoned for telling the truth. Daniel Hale was the whistleblower on drone assassination programs. So, do you guys know who Alan Dulles is? Because he is literally the most powerful unelected man in American history. Well, maybe now it could be Elon Musk, but I don't know. I would have to do a deep dive into that. He was the first civilian director of Central Intelligence under Eisenhower and briefly under Kennedy. Before the CIA, Dulles worked for the OSS, the World War II era precursor to the CIA. He came from a powerful elite family. His brother, John Foster Dulles, was Secretary of State. They ran U.S. foreign policy as a family empire. He believed that democracy was expandable. If it got in the way of U.S. if it got in the way of U.S. global control. Mastermind of dozens of foreign coups and assassinations. He overthrew Iran's democracy in 1953 via Operation Ajax. He overthrew Guatemala's democracy in 1954. He targeted Congo's Patrice Lumumba for execution. He built a network of assassins, propaganda channels, and shell companies to funnel weapons and money. He helped Nazi scientists escape prosecution via Operation Paperclip. He was fired by JFK after the Bay of Pigs disaster, but stayed in power behind the scenes and was appointed to the Warren Commission to investigate JFK's assassination. Can you crack up at this shit? Let that sink in. He helped plan the coup and then he helped cover it up. So I'm going to go into this, even though most of us know exactly because we learned this in school, but some people don't, and I want to refresh everyone's memory. What exactly was the Bay of Pigs? Well, in 1961, the CIA trained Cuban exiles to invade Cuba and overthrow Fidel Castro. The plan? Land at the Bay of Pigs, spark a popular uprising, and replace Castro with a U.S.-friendly puppet. Instead, the plan failed spectacularly. Castro knew they were coming, no Cuban uprising happened, 100 plus invaders were killed, and the rest were captured. The CIA then expected JFK to send U.S. air support, and he refused, not wanting an overt act of war. So the CIA intentionally let it fail, knowing JFK would take the political hit, and he did, and use it to pressure him into future action. The CIA's calculation embarrassing JFK into launching full-scale war against Cuba. JFK was furious. He realized the CIA had lied, manipulated, and cornered him. And that's when he said that he wanted to splinter the CIA. Well, enter Lyndon B. Johnson. Do we think that he knew about the assassination? Well, there is growing evidence and credible speculation that yes, he did. And here's why. Lyndon B. Johnson hated JFK and feared being dropped from the 1964 ticket. He was friends with Texas oil barons and military contractors who despised Kennedy because he wanted peace. J. Edgar Hoover, the FBI director, a close Lyndon B. Johnson ally, covered up key evidence in the assassination. And LBJ benefited instantly. He took power, escalated Vietnam, and protected the CIA from being dismantled. Lady Bird, Johnson's press secretary, later said that LBJ knew JFK would be killed in Dallas. What the fuck was Vietnam? A war we started, we couldn't explain, and refused to end. A genocide in the name of freedom. Why were we there? Well, French colonialism failed in Vietnam. The U.S. didn't want a communist victory to inspire other Southeast Asian nations. This is the fake domino theory. Vietnam wanted independence, but that meant no U.S. bases, no corporate control. The U.S. backed a fake government in South Vietnam to control the region. What really happened then? Well, the Gulf of Tonkin incident of 1964 falsified evidence. The U.S. claimed North Vietnamese boats attacked a U.S. ship. They didn't. But Lyndon B. Johnson used it to get war powers. Carpet bombing, napalm, Agent Orange, millions of civilians murdered, entire forests burned, birth defects still plague Vietnam today. U.S. soldiers were lied to, used as cannon fodder, then discarded. What was the point? To protect military profits, of course, to stop a non-capitalist government from existing independently, to make sure no small country could ever say no to a U.S. empire. JFK wanted to pull out of Vietnam. Lyndon B. Johnson escalated it. Nixon prolonged it. The war only ended when public protest, press leaks, and a broken army forced their hand. So I guess we are all aware that Bush Sr. was the director of CIA for 1 year from 1976 to 1977. He then immediately became the vice president under Reagan and then president in 88. His appointment to the CIA was a strategic year. It was just after Watergate, just before the Church Committee started exposing CIA crimes, meant to protect the agency from reforms and public outrage. He shut down transparency, reestablished CIA credibility, and laid the foundation for Iran-Contra, the Reagan CIA death squads, Middle East regime changes. His long-standing relationships with oil companies, military contractors, and foreign dictators made him an empire insider like no other president before him. George H.W. Bush is the bridge between the CIA's rogue rise and the post-9/11 war state. And it gets even more wild. The Bush family was connected to the bin Laden family through oil and defense deals. 9/11, while the towers were falling, the bin Laden family in the U.S. was flown out on private jets, while all other flights were grounded. George W. Bush then used 9/11 to invade Iraq, which had nothing to do with 9/11, hand massive contracts to Halliburton, Dick Cheney's company, his vice president, and expand the surveillance state. So this is a dynasty, a CIA-connected, oil-funded, war-profiteering dynasty. The Bush family is the spine of America's modern empire, and no one talks about it enough. So do we know what the Iran-Contra deal is? It's a secret U.S. operation where Reagan's people sold weapons to Iran, our supposed enemy, and used the money to fund illegal death squads in Central America. Yeah, you heard that correct. Here's the play-by-play. Congress passed a law, the Boland Amendment, banning the U.S. from funding the Contras, a violent right-wing rebel group in Nicaragua. The Contras were raping and torturing civilians, so funding them is basically illegal, correct? Well, meanwhile, Iran was in a war with Iraq. Publicly, the U.S. was against Iran, but secretly, Reagan officials sold Iran weapons. Reagan's men funneled the money from those weapon sales to the Contras, violating U.S. law. The entire thing was hidden from Congress and the American people. It got exposed in 1986, and it should have brought down Reagan. Who was involved? Oliver North. He was a key operative, shredded documents, and took the fall. Elliott Abrams helped cover it up, later served under Trump. George H.W. Bush, implicated but pardoned by none other than himself. And Reagan, of course, who claimed, "I don't recall," over 100 times under oath. This was treason, plain and simple, a secret war funded illegally, directed by the White House. What were the Reagan CIA death squads? U.S. trained and funded paramilitary groups in Central America, especially El Salvador, Guatemala, and Nicaragua, that committed mass murder, rape, and torture in the name of fighting communism. Where and how did this happen? Well, it happened in El Salvador. Reagan sent over $4 billion in aids and weapons. He trained the Atlacatl Battalion, who massacred entire villages, including El Mesote massacre, which killed 1,000 civilians, mostly women and children. U.S. soldiers trained the killers at the School of the Americas. It happened in Guatemala, supported genocidal campaigns against indigenous Mayans. CIA-backed dictator Afran Rios Montt murdered thousands. Reagan publicly praised him as a man of great integrity. It happened in Nicaragua. The CIA created and armed the Contras. The Contras blew up schools, killed nurses and teachers, and raped women. Reagan called them freedom fighters. Okay? The big picture, these weren't just isolated crimes. This was U.S. foreign policy. Kill the poor, destroy the resistance, protect American corporations, lie to the public, wrap it in a flag. The Reagan administration committed war crime after war crime across 3 continents, and most Americans still don't fucking know about it. I'm beginning to see, and I'm sure you're beginning to hear as you listen to my podcast, that there's a lot of interwoven rape happening every single time that we're talking about war or anything having to do with government, right? Women and children are always the ones that suffer the most, and we're also the ones that never start the war. So why do you think that they rape and kill women in war? Because rape is a weapon of empire. Always has been. It's not about lust. It's about domination, humiliation, and erasing the feminine from power. It's literally been from indigenous women in the Americas to Vietnamese women during the war, to Muslim women tortured in Abu Ghraib, to African girls abducted by militias trained by U.S.-backed governments, to Palestinian women raped and killed with impunity. This is strategic. It's a part of the doctrine, because if women rise, war ends, and they do not want to learn to live anywhere else other than by their rule. They can't afford that because they don't know how to live in peace. And if we rule, they will not be in charge anymore. They pass laws here for the same reason. They ban abortion, they gut maternal care, they defund schools, they ignore gun violence, they protect rapists. Think Brock Turner, think Jeffrey Epstein, think Donald Trump. Patriarchy doesn't just survive through violence, it thrives on it. The violence is the point. But here's the thing, they cannot stop, and they haven't been able to stop. Women are waking up everywhere and all at once. And not just let's get a seat at the table feminism. We're talking burn the table down energy, platform each other, build tech they can't control, create sovereign economies, raise sons who won't become soldiers of patriarchy, protect girls before they're broken, and write history books ourselves. Most of the people who rise to power here in the United States serve the empire, but not all. And it only stays that way if we let it. Right? We have to acknowledge that FDR brought the New Deal and gave the working class power they'd never had before. We have to acknowledge that Obama's Affordable Health Care Act, despite its flaws, saved lives and expanded coverage for millions. We have to acknowledge Barbara Lee, AOC, Bernie Sanders, Rashida Tlaib, are all pushing hard against the war machine today. Organizers and voters in Georgia, Wisconsin, Arizona turned out to block fascism in 2020. The real people do that real people do run for office and real people can still win. The system is rigged, of course, but it's not unbreakable. It's designed to wear us down. But the minute we all show up, running for office, voting with clarity, holding them accountable, the whole rigging starts to come undone. This isn't about giving up on democracy. It's about giving up on the lies that protect oligarchy. I want to talk about Honduras in 2009 under the Obama administration, with Hillary Clinton being the Secretary of State. Democratically elected President Manuel Zelaya was kidnapped by the Honduran militia and exiled in his pajamas. Why? Because he had raised the minimum wage, supported a new constitution, and aligned with progressive governments to Latin America like Evo Morales and Hugo Chavez. The U.S. called it a constitutional crisis, and it wasn't. It was a right-wing militia coup. What was Hillary's role? Well, publicly, as Secretary of State, she condemned the violence. Privately, her State Department refused to call it a coup because doing so would have cut off U.S. aid and military support. She then worked to delay Zelaya's return, giving time for the coup leaders to hold elections and legitimize their power. This was unfortunately later exposed through her own emails, specifically those released by the State Department under the Freedom of Information Act. Lawsuits filed by journalists, including from The Intercept, The Nation, and The New York Times. In one 2009 email, Clinton writes, "We should work towards a solution that does not result in a return of Zelaya to power." That's not a neutral diplomacy, that's a strategic sabotage of democracy. And what was the impact? Well, Honduras became one of the most violent countries in the world. Femicides skyrocketed. Death squads targeted journalists, LGBTQ people, and environmental activists. Berta Cáceres, an indigenous activist and Goldman Prize winner, was assassinated in 2016 after years of threat. The killers had links to the U.S.-backed government. The migrant caravans that Republicans demonize, they began after this coup Hillary helped cover up. Do you guys remember Chelsea Manning? She was a soldier who told the truth. Chelsea Manning was born Bradley Manning, transitioned while in prison. U.S. Army intelligence analyst deployed to Iraq, had access to classified war files and diplomatic cables. So what did she leak? Well, she leaked a collateral murder video. U.S. helicopter killed a group of Iraqi civilians and journalists. They laughed about it over the radio, and then WikiLeaks published the video in 2010. Iraq war logs detailed over 66,000 civilian deaths previously unreported. It exposed rape cover-ups, torture by U.S. allies, and execution squads. The U.S. diplomatic cables showed how U.S. officials pressured foreign governments, rigged elections, and spied on allies. Included cables about Honduras that contradicted Clinton's public story. Chelsea Manning didn't just leak documents, she leaked proof that the U.S. war machine was lying every single day. What happened to her? She was arrested in 2010, sentenced to 35 years in prison, longest sentence ever for a U.S. whistleblower. Barack Obama commuted her sentence in 2017 after 7 years. She is now a free woman, an activist, and a symbol of moral courage under empire. So, here we are today, 2025, and we have Donald Trump, his fascist mask completely off. He assassinated Iran's top general. Well, when I say he, again, not him, but his cabinet. So assassinated Iran's top general on Iraqi soil without congressional approval, nearly triggered World War III, increased drone strikes, even more than Obama, but removed the reporting requirements so no one could track civilian deaths. Sold $100+ billions in weapons to Saudi Arabia, enabled and defended their genocide in Yemen, pulled out of the Iran nuclear deal, destabilizing the region, and he moved the Jerusalem embassy, a deliberate middle finger to Palestinians. He has given a full thumbs up and green light to Netanyahu's apartheid expansion. Trump doesn't just support Israel, he turned the U.S. into its full-time attack dog. Domestically, he called U.S. generals my generals. He used militarized police on American protesters. He's still doing that right now. He pardoned war criminals, including a Navy SEAL convicted of murdering a teenage prisoner. And he turned white nationalism into policy with the Muslim ban and its flagships. I think that liberals think that Trump was an isolationist, but he was just selectively imperialist. He escalates violence while pretending to end endless wars, which he never ends because no one listens to him, because no one respects him. He pulled out of Syria, yes, but he left the oil fields under U.S. control. He strengthened ties with authoritarian regimes, Saudi Arabia, Israel, because that's what Israel is right now, just in case anyone's, not aware. Israel under Netanyahu is a right wing. His whole faction in government is right wing. He privatized war even further via Eric Prince, Blackwater, and private contractors. This was his 2016 to 2020 time in office. After that came Joe Biden, but Donald Trump is doing even more harm currently. But Joe Biden was the most polished, polite manager of empire in modern memory, right? But what did he actually do, or what did he allow his administration, his cabinet, his CIA, all of these people working under him as a prop? What did he allow them to do? Well, he gave billions and billions and billions of dollars to Israel, literally just flattening Gaza. Hospitals, schools, journalists, rape, everything was killed, murdered. There's nothing left. International Court of Justice ruled it and constitutes what he's doing in Gaza a genocide. He vetoed multiple UN ceasefire resolutions. We were the only country to do so. He refused to call for a ceasefire despite mass protest, including from his own voters. Unbelievable. They continue to repeat the same narrative that this genocide was a self-defense from October 7th. By the way, October 7th was completely staged. They knew October 7th was going to happen. By they, I mean Netanyahu and his people. So while children were being pulled from rubble, Biden was approving new weapon shipments. That's what he did. He increased tech-enhanced imperialism. He continued U.S. drone programs, backed AI-assisted surveillance and targeting in Gaza and elsewhere, expanded military aid to Ukraine while ignoring Palestine, strengthened ties with authoritarian regimes also in the name of stability. Here at home, he ran on restoring decency, but upheld Trump-era military budgets. He continued Trump's border militarization. He increased funding for police, even after George Floyd protests. The bottom line is that Trump made war look like fascism, and Biden made war look like diplomacy. But both kept the war going. You can't bomb your way to peace, by the way. You can't vote your way out of lies, and we can't stop from lying, but we can stop believing them. The truth is that the Middle East was never a threat. What's a threat, actually, is U.S. foreign policy, corporations, and billionaire interest. Both parties serve empire unless you force them not to. Our tax dollars fund war, surveillance, and genocide, unless we stop it. There are definite cracks in the system. Whistleblowers, politicians, some, investigative outlets like Democracy Now!, Midas Touch, Breaking Points, The Intercept. movements like BDS, Code Pink, Veterans for Peace. If we let them, they're going to continue to tell us that the Middle East is the enemy. But the real enemy is here the whole time on Capitol Hill, in boardrooms lined with flags and dollar signs. And the good news, they only win if we believe them. So stop believing them. Start resisting them, and never again let them sell us genocide with a smile.